Welcome to the Goddesses of Social Work podcast, hosted by Renita Ray Davis, licensed clinical social worker, board-approved social work clinical supervisor, and facilitator of the Goddesses of Social Work supervision community. Join us as we travel through the social work journeys told by the Goddesses of Social Work community members, past and present, as they make their way toward clinical licensure.
Welcome to the Goddesses of Social Work podcast. I'm here today with Dr. Alea Nicole Williams, DSW, LCSW, BACS, also known as Dr. Lay. Dr. Alea Nicole Williams, DSW, LCSW, BACS, also known as Dr. Lay, is a licensed clinical social worker, psychotherapist, and board-approved clinical supervisor who specializes in working with transgender and gender diverse individuals. Alea is also a Black transgender woman who has great understanding of the inequities, stress, and emotional health concerns that plague her community. In addition to her passion for transgender mental health equity and access, Alea is centered in working towards the advancement of disenfranchised people of color and oppressed individuals of all intersections of identity, which fuels her intense aspirations and fight for social justice. Dr. Lay asserts that it is her ultimate aspiration to support her clients in achieving a state of their own version of inner peace, a sense of empowerment and self autonomy, and an overall improvement in their sense of self worth, thus contributing to an improved quality of life. Welcome to the show, Dr. Lay.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited for you to be here. I was excited about this one. Dr. Lay, and do you mind if I call you Lay at times or
Please call me
okay,
Alea.
okay, but I love giving Black women their letters, so I will call you Dr. Lay as well. But Dr. Lay, what did you want to be when you were growing up, or who did you want to most be like when you were growing up?
Ooh, so growing up, I always wanted to be a singer or a performer. I've always wanted to do that. I always watched my mom and my grandmother sing. They passed me along that gift. And so that was something I've always wanted to be. I grew up in the 80s, and so a lot of the things that I watched at that time were very music infused. A lot of the cartoons and things of that time. And so I've always wanted to pursue that, like music. Um, I don't know, I guess performing in music, making music with other people. That's what I've long wanted to do from childhood. Now that did morph over time, but we can talk more about that as questions come up.
And so how did it morph? Let's go. So you're wanting to be a singer. However, you became a social worker. I don't want to get into your social work journey just yet. So how did it morph? Did you get to perform at all ever?
So I did, but probably not the way that I envisioned it, right? And I think why it morphed more than anything was life just started life in, and you start to come as a child. I think that's usually the most purest time in our lives when we have these big dreams and big ideas, and I want to go and do these things and those things. And then as you grow, depending on your social determinants and your own intersections of where you're born into, you start realizing what things are possible and what things probably aren't as feasible. And so I think for me, it was just life coming in and me having to figure out a way to live and survive and without succumbing to the world, trying to pursue music. And it was really hard. I came of age like in the very, very late 90s, early 2000s. So it was still pretty hard to navigate that space, walking into, trans identity as well. So
Absolutely. I would love to hear about that particular journey for you before we get into your social work journey. Do you want to share?
yeah. I'll share some, some bits and pieces of the journey and just kind of how I came to be. Um, so I think for me, when I was probably about 5 or 6, people laugh when I say this, but it's just so true. About the age that you start realizing, how you're going to shape up in terms of like socialized gender, right? that was probably about the time that I realized that I wasn't who I felt I was in spirit. Because in spirit, I've always felt that I am how I present now. I've always known that, I am a woman in spirit. I've always just long identified with that. And so, about the age of maybe 5, 6 or so, when I started realizing that I'm being socialized differently, is when I started noticing, now, wait a minute, why my cousin getting all, and me and my cousin still laugh about this. Why my cousin getting all the toys I want? Why she getting to wear all the clothes I want to wear? I want to remember in the 80s, I don't know if you remember like what kids used to wear, like the little romper jumpsuit things. Oh, I used to love them. And I used to be so mad at her, like, why are you getting to wear this? I want to wear this. And so I would just kind of like borrow pieces here and there, borrow her little dolls here and there. Um, and then she often laughs because we would play house and it was just so entrenched in me, like, okay, girl, well, we're gonna be neighbors, okay? Like we couldn't do anything else. We just had to be like neighbors. It was very 227-ish, is what I call it. But along that time, is when I started realizing, so people aren't seeing me as I see myself. And that was a pretty hard reality to try to, work into. It kind of felt like I was misplaced, so to speak. And as I got older, I think I just became more and more just saddened by it. Like just this is where I'm stuck. This is not who I feel like I am, but this is where I'm stuck. And then I think I made it to be about maybe 15. And I told myself, like, if I have to continue living like this in this body under these social, like, I don't want to keep going on. And so at that point, I made a choice before it got to the point of me becoming suicidal. I made the choice that I wanted to make the decision to just stand in my truth and just speak my truth. And so this was like, again, the late 90s. So it wasn't received very well. I will say that when I told my family, and I think they were just like, so you saying you like boys? I'm like, well, that's not exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying like I'm a woman. I'm not really even worried about the other piece of that just yet. Like this is who I am. And so as time went on, my family, God bless their hearts, they never disowned me. They never kicked me out. But oh, did they try to roll with the punches of it all with me, just, finding my own comfort and expression. And then from that age there on, um, I just kind of walked into it. I think divine intervention made it to where I didn't have to go through high school, so to speak, where I'm from, because I was getting into so much trouble around that time. I had ended up getting like kicked out of school. But the reason I was getting into trouble is because I was long like fighting, defending myself against, people who were trying to bully me. Uh, of course, the school system just wasn't equipped to know how to deal with that. And in my opinion, it still isn't. Um, but they weren't equipped to know how to deal with it. And so at that point, I, was kicked out, but I found a way to graduate from home through the mail, actually. And so, but during that time, it gave me a chance to go inward, which is something that I think I need in nature. For anybody who's familiar with zodiac signs, I'm a Scorpio, and so for me personally, I have to have that time to go inward and just regenerate before I step back out. And so it was kind of that was built in for me. I ended up finishing high school pretty early compared to when I was supposed to finish. And so I had to wait until I wanted to wait until I was 18 to go off to college. And so by the time I went off to college, I was pretty deep in my transition. Um, and yeah, the rest of that, I can add to my social work journey, but it became a pretty rocky road from there for a
I
little
bet.
bit.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to, there's two things that stood out at 15. You could have went one way, which was taking your life, and
Mhm.
or the other way, which is what you did, thankfully, and standing your truth. And as soon as you said that, I'm just thinking about all the beautiful babies who didn't feel strong enough or confident or courageous enough to stand in their truth. And so I just want to speak to that and say, yay, you stood in your truth. And you're still here with us. And I know you'll tell us about, as much as you want, how rocky a road that has been. But I'm glad that you did and that others can hear that this is where you are now, Dr. Lay, after making that pivotal decision, right? And then, Dr. Lay, you literally got kicked out of high school, and here you are with a whole doctorate degree.
I gotta say, for anybody who's a believer, I definitely give credit to God. Give all praise to Him for just keeping His hand on me and keeping me encouraged. Another piece of that is I attribute it to my zodiac, and just if I want something, I don't stop. Um, I don't care how long I have to go for it. I'll play the long game, which I've had to do a lot of times, but I'm going to keep working toward it. I've learned over the years to be patient, and to look at the small steps of things. And so, with that, if I made my mind up for it, um, I'm gonna get it one way or the other, unless I'm told, okay, this is not for you. So,
Absolutely. And anybody who knows me, you don't know me because we just met today, but I am all into astrology.
okay, okay.
So yes, and one of the things I love that you brought that up that you were a Scorpio because I'm kind of doing some unofficial research, but Carmen Turner Schott, she was on the podcast. She wrote a book called Eighth and 12th House Astrological Signs, and the eighth house is ruled by the sign of Scorpio, which is about those of us who have eighth house energy, which Scorpio would, are natural born healers. So you were born to be in this space of healing. And but to get into this, you got to go through rebirth and transformation over and over and over again to really be empathetic towards the other people's healing journey and to be a guide really and to be a
Mm-hmm.
guide for others on their healing journey. So
Oh, that's so true.
yeah, that Scorpio energy in the eighth house is pretty powerful. Yeah.
It is, and when you say that, it speaks to me. I will not go too far on a tangent, but it really speaks to me about some of the moments that I've encountered in life before I even realized that that was a part of my gifts as a person. Just having the ability to, I don't know whether it's just how people pull from something that's there or what, but that's been in place since I was a child. I've seen it in place with people who have been very influential in my life, who've made decisions based on the fact that this child is asking me to do this. Um, a lot of things that will be included in my memoir that is to come, but just so many different times where I've seen that energy at play, and I've realized, regardless of my own flaws, because I definitely don't walk on water, nor do I float or glide. My feet definitely touch the ground, and sometimes they dig into the ground. But just realizing that sometimes we don't give ourselves enough credit for the spiritual gifts that we've been bestowed as well. That just hit me in a different place. So.
Absolutely. We were just talking about that too with your green thumb, and I'm telling you that it's probably from your ancestral line, as I believe
Mm-hmm.
mine is. And so we talk a lot. I hear, especially I'm not on social media that much, but a lot about generational curses. But what about the generational blessings that we've
Mm.
been bestowed? And that Scorpio energy definitely is a. And I love how you said you can put your feet in the ground sometimes, really dig into the ground. That's that fixed Scorpio energy. You can be stubborn too. But isn't that, I love that. I say that with love because I think being stubborn is how you become so tenacious, is how you've been able to overcome and become this beautiful woman that you are with the DSW and all the other things you're going to tell us about on your social work journey. But before we get to your social work journey, I also want to shout out your family because you're right. In the 90s, early 2000s, I bet trying to help you navigate this whole thing. Obviously, I'm sure people probably wish they could have done and said things differently and better. But what I heard you say was nothing but love was trying to happen, even in their flawed ways as well. So
Yes,
shouting
yes.
out your family too in this journey.
And can I just add that to any other family who may be at that point on the journey? Sometimes you won't always have the language. Put the focus on the love. Love your child through enough to try to gain understanding. Because there was no books. There were no books out on how to raise a Black trans child in the hood in 1997 and 98 and 99 and all those times. There was no book out. My family, they loved me through it. My mom, I think when she first saw me in full prowess, she said, well, I mean, it's not like I didn't know. And she said, I can't really just be upset because you look just like me. And so at that point, not to say there weren't here's and there's and things that we had bumped heads on, but it was never to a point of you got to get out of my house. You are no longer my child. You're no longer my grandchild, et cetera, et cetera. Now, my grandmother would get very colorful and tell me to, take that blonde such and such hair out of my head because I'm not a white woman. She would love to tell me that. Uh, but, I would tell her, it's because Beyonce. Anyway, exactly.
Absolutely.
I'm a Beyonce fan from way back, from Destiny's Child. So.
I am proudly wearing my Cowboy Carter shirt today. Yes. And you know what? I was looking at her because I got the box and her what color is her hair now? Is it platinum or something that
Yeah.
oh my goodness. And you know what? And I was thinking about that. Nobody has that color hair. And that, actually when we're talking about blonde hair, and I know the generation you're talking about, white women have the blonde hair, and those in the African American community, we like that's for white women. But now we're able to wear all color hair and wear it proudly. And thank you, Beyonce, for leading the way. We're gonna give her flowers. Oh my goodness, I'm already having a good time with you, Lay. I'm already having a good time. I am so curious about your social work journey. You are Dr. Alea Nicole Williams, DSW, LCSW Bach. How did you get here, darling?
Ooh, girl. So first of all, let me first go back and be very honest. So when I picked up about when I went off to college, I started college in the spring of 2001. If I would have been on schedule, I wouldn't have graduated high school until May of 2001. So I started like a semester before my class would have started. I was not ready at all. So I got into college and I went to the University of Louisiana in Monroe, which is like I think maybe 30 minutes, 45 minutes from Grambling State University. So I spent a lot of my time going to like parties at Grambling. I More often than not, probably about 10% of my time was spent actually going to class. Which really reflected in my grades, in my grade point average at the end of that first semester. So much so that my first grade point average in college was a 0.00001. Like I didn't, it was like I went to class one day and was just like, okay, I'm done. Didn't know nothing, didn't care nothing about dropping no classes. So all of that was factored in. What's so ironic about that is for a long time after that, I was just kind of scrambling going to school. I went back to ULM a little bit, still wasn't going to class, still away from home. And the thing that I have to factor in is that for all intents and purposes, I've been a very sheltered child in the regard that I wanted to be. I wanted to be under my family. I didn't really want to be away from them. And so when I got away from them, it was just chaos. It was just chaos. It was like, oh, I'm free. I didn't have any money, didn't have any inclination for any type of job. Just, I want to go to this party. I need some blonde tracks. I need, just out here, just no direction whatsoever. Until I would go home. And so I went back to ULM, didn't do well that semester, did a little better, but didn't do that well. After that, I came home for a little bit. I'm like, okay, I just need to work. I guess I have to get a job, blah, 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 blah. Started hitting those real world walls. like, okay, girl, yeah, you can go get a job, but remember, you're trans, so you're about to run into these things when you go to these jobs. And so I ran into a lot of systemic like discrimination in the workplace. And so so much so that I can remember working at Walmart. I will never forget this. And I'll share this piece. Though it can also be found more in detail in my memoir that is to come. But I can remember working in Walmart and lawn and garden, and like I was working outside, which isn't my tea because I'm the person that doesn't like heat. But I needed a job. I'm trying to like be responsible. I can't keep leaning on my family for money, all these things. And I will never forget this lady was a white lady. She didn't like me because I used to wear capris. At that time, I hadn't gone through my legal like transition and things. So I'm still like a teenager, like 18 or 19. And I got accused of like the dumbest thing I think I've ever heard of. I got accused of laying on the ground in the parking lot, sleeping on the job, like in broad daylight. And I said, huh? I said, I don't even like touching the plants. So why would I lay on the ground? At that time, I'm like, I don't even like getting dirty. Like, what's going on? I didn't have the power to argue with them. So I was out. And what it boiled down to was what started to be a long line of those experiences, and that we don't know where to put you. We don't know where you belong. We don't know this. We don't know that. Ma'am, this is Walmart. This is not Harvard. So, running into those things, and then even walking into the mental health spaces, like from the direct care aspect, and being told, well, we don't know where to place you. We don't know whether you should work with the men or with the women. So we got to let you go. I can remember that happened so much that at one point I was like, oh my gosh, like I'll do, like, can I just be like a custodian? Like, I just need a job. Like, no, we're sorry. We think it's best for you that we just let you go. Like, these are the things that I was running into. And so along that time, I was also on my own like personal development of trying to figure out what I needed to do to better myself. That's ongoing. But at that time, it was really important because it's like, again, very daunting. Like, is this what I'm going to have to face in the workplace? And so finally, I made my way back into school. I started going to LSU, Alexandria, which I'm from Alexandria, Louisiana originally. And I started taking psychology classes. I actually, when I got serious, I realized I had to go back and pretty much learn math from the time I stopped it all the way up until college algebra, which took a lot of energy because I'm not a person that I can definitely do math. I actually can do well at it if I focus, but it takes my literal soul to like really work into it. And so at that time, I fell into psychology. And I'm like, you know what? This is probably the first time I'm really interested in this. Like, I'm actually interested in these things. And so myself and my cousin and one of my best friends, who's also a woman of trans experience, we did a lot of things together at that time. And so she would even, matter of fact, the last time we talked, she was like, I should have known something because you talking about referring to me and one of our other friends, y'all are taking these tests and y'all are just making A's and this, that, and the other. And I'm like, well, for me, it's because I'm interested in it. And also at that time, I was kind of reminded that, you're not dumb. Like, what happened? You used to make like straight A's before you really hit this wall. What happened and what it was, A, I had to find something I was interested in that really pulled my interest. And B, I had to learn how I retain and process information. And what I found was I was a person who does not retain, and still am. I don't retain solely by reading. I do, and I am able to read, but my brain is so tactile that I have to be doing something. So I write a lot. I write to retain. I, do things tactile, make notes. That's how I retain information. So when I learned that, I'm able to then go in and take tests and be able to pull that information back more readily than how I was sitting and trying to read that. And sometimes, quite honestly, even falling asleep reading some of it because it just didn't even make sense. And so after that, I'm like, okay, I'm really interested in this. So I'm going to pursue a degree in psychology. Green, and was like, okay, I'm going to finish this. And I ended up transferring to Northwestern, finished the degree in psychology, the bachelor's. I'm like, okay, I'm a psychologist. And then one lady was like, no, you're not. You're gonna have to go a little bit further than this to do that. I'm like, what? And so I started doing research right after that, looking for master's programs that offered masters in counseling psychology. Um, and I'm so glad I didn't go that route. And love to all of my licensed professional counselor colleagues. Like, love to, I've met some beautiful individuals who've gone down that field. But to my understanding, from what I've been privy to, there is a little bit more tedious in terms of being able to work while earning that licensure. And so, just so happened, one of my very, very close friends, who's also a relative, her name is Tracy Miller Earl. She's an LCSW back as well. She's a few years younger than me, but she just so happens to be graduating with her bachelor's in social work like a year before I was getting ready to graduate. And so she told me, girl, you need to start looking into, social work, because a lot of the things that you're saying you want to do, you can do that in social work and then more. And so where I wasn't finding a lot in those counseling psychology programs for masters, I started finding a lot in the way of MSW programs. And a lot of people from where I'm from were going and commuting back and forth to Stephen F. Austin, which is, I think, in Nacogdoches, Texas. So they would work and do things at home, and they would commute back and forth there. Well, I couldn't afford that. And I knew that. I knew I couldn't afford that. So I had to make the decision to say I have to find somewhere where I can go live, and possibly, either make it, with what I have saved as a reserve, or be able to at least get a job. And so that's when I found UT Arlington in Arlington, Texas, and started going there for my MSW. I think the most part of the first semester, I was able to flow by without working. But then with everything being so far apart, it was like, girl, if you go a couple of more months, you're not going to have any money. So you got to get a job. And so I ended up starting working in nonprofit with the homeless. And I ended up working there throughout my time in graduate school, the whole time there. And so that's how I ended up in social work. I think it was the best decision that I had ever made. And I think that, I feel as though it was almost kismet. It was divine intervention, because me and Tracy, we are related like family. Our families are related. But we became friends, close friends around that time. And it was our paths crossing that set me on that trajectory of even knowing about social work, because, and I'll say this a little bit later about some of the misconceptions of social work. When you hear social worker, depending on where you are, many people hear CPS, all of the things that sometimes have nothing to do with social work, because you don't even need a social work degree to work in CPS, right? And so I'm like, I did not know this. And it was the best thing I could have done, because it allowed me to work toward my MSW, get my LMSW, still work and attribute that experience and earn a decent living, while trying to pursue other things. That's a piece of the journey.
Oh, I love it. It's a beautiful journey. I'm curious, Dr. Lay, what was your, because I don't know if you're aware, but you probably are. ASWB came out with the numbers in regards to Black and Brown folks and our pass rate, specifically in the South. In Alabama, and I think even in Louisiana, the pass rate is 38% for the clinical. And so for Black women. I'm curious, what was your licensing journey? Because I love how you found your MSW, but then you knew, because a lot of people don't realize I was 10 years post MSW before I even got we called it LG back then, but before I even got my LGSW, how did you know the importance of licensure, and what was your licensing journey?
So the importance of it, I can't fully say that I realized the gravity of it when I first went for it. My mindset, again, the same as what led me on the DSW journey, is if I want something, if I'm going to pursue it, I want the highest level of it. So this is what I got to do to get it, right? And so immediately after I finished and got my LMSW, maybe a couple of months after, I started clinical supervision. I made the decision, like, I'm going to start this. Let me tell you, it was not easy. I started it in Texas. because I still was living in Texas at the time. Wonderful supervisor, Kristen Connor, who was my supervisor throughout the time of me getting my clinical experience. But it was, there were times where I couldn't afford it. I couldn't afford supervision. And I mean, it came down to, especially right after when I was getting my footing as an LMSW and kind of making the transition in terms of income and all of the things that come with that. Like, there were times where I wasn't able to pay my supervision, so I had to have a back balance, and that just didn't feel right, right? And so I would put a pause on it because she was the type of person at the time who's like, don't worry about it, you can pay me later. I'm like, no, but I don't really like on people like that. So I'm just gonna take a pause here and there. So there were times where I had to take pauses. So it literally took me, I went from 2014, and in between that time, I went home to Louisiana for a little bit because my mom was still alive at that time. And then I ended up going back to Texas, which then I finished my supervision when I went back. But it took me from 2014 up until 2019 to finish my supervision. And let me tell you, that within itself was a journey. But then getting the approval to test was a nightmare in Texas at that time because they were so backlogged on applications. I think, if I'm not mistaken, they were maybe close to a year behind on applications. Then by the time I got the notification, they were saying, well, you didn't finish your hours within time to be able to test. And I'm like, so I fell through the floor, and this was right after my mom passed, by the way. And so she passed in 2019. I finished before she passed, and she passed in June of 2019. So by the time it was August of 2019, I'm being told, oh, you have to appeal to do this. And when that lady told me that, when she said over the phone, well, I don't think you meet the requirements, I let out a scream that you would have thought that I got a call that somebody else had passed away, because in my mind, it was like, oh my God, I put all this work, all this blood, all this sweat and tears, and scraped up all this money. And you're telling me that I won't be able to utilize my experience. Again, went through all of the motions with that, took the time I needed to kind of process it, fell back in, talking to my support network, who, Tracy's still a part of that. So she was like, girl, I think you should consider trying to, attempt to get approval through Louisiana. Went through Louisiana, got the approval, was able to test, and got my license that way through home. Because I was still in LMSW in Louisiana as well. And so that ended up happening. And then I was able to upgrade most of the licenses that I had in other states after that. So again, another Kismet type thing, but definitely a journey that I think, sometimes people don't take into account. Like, that supervision journey can be a lot. And sometimes even on the supervisory end, there are different nuances that come up that you don't know how to navigate until they come up. And then you learn that way sometimes. So it's a lot.
Absolutely. I have the honor of supervising a community of social workers here in Alabama and in Louisiana. And when I tell you, getting them to the finish line, is tough, and it does take time. But then, especially when you have high achievers like yourself, who are like, I'm gonna finish this thing, and life, like you said in the beginning, life be life. And so the fact that you brought up the supervision journey in and of itself is is a journey. But I think it teaches you about yourself, and there's a lot of supervisors out here. I would like to think that I'm one who want, and it sounds like your supervisor was one who really want to see you guys get to the finish line, who want to see you get to the finish line. And so I'm glad that happened for you. Are you now licensed in Texas in at the clinic? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm licensed there. I upgraded everything there. I was licensed in Missouri at the time. I went ahead and upgraded there. I've since gotten licensed in New York and California, just because at one point
Awesome.
it's like I want to be licensed everywhere that I might want to live.
Mm,
And I'm soon to work on getting clinically licensed in Georgia. Georgia's, for anybody who is licensed there or plans to get licensed there, to my understanding, what I ran into was most other states, even New York and California, require their number of face-to-face hours fall in alignment with what I did in Texas. Georgia's was, I think, either 120 or 135. I think it may have been 120 face-to-face hours that it required.
Mhm.
That led me either having to go back into supervision. They wanted me to go back into supervision, which
Mhm.
I couldn't really get a clear answer on that. And I don't think it was possible, at least where I'm living at home, because I have the highest level of licensure here, right? So it created that type of nuance. Um, and so what ended up happening with that is they said, well, you can reapply when you have your doctorate. And so I said, then I think that'll probably be the best route for me to go because the doctorate can count as the other hours. But it was such a journey in getting that done. And I also think that when we think about supervision, sometimes we have to think about those things as well. And I think as a supervisor, I would be remiss not to discuss that with people who plan to do licensure in other states. But my hope is that that compact licensure will continue to grow and kick in because it's necessary.
Mhm. I have some thoughts on that. I do think it's important that whatever I love your intentionality behind what states you want to be licensed in. And I do think I like that you've had to communicate with each state board to find out what the state laws are and what their requirements were in order for you to maintain compliance. I also love, and I talked to my LMSWs about this, that you went ahead and got licensed in multiple states at the LMSW level so that all you had to do is just upgrade it to the LC or whatever their letters are in the states that you were in. And to me that makes the best sense. But yeah, each state has different requirements, and so
Yeah.
some are easier than others. But you talked about that DSW sitting in for the hours that you were missing with supervision for Georgia. What made you decide to go for the DSW, and what was that experience like for you?
It was actually I think collectively, it was a beautiful experience because it again showed me that I can make it through things that I think can get really tough. I think the DSW program was very rigorous in the amount of research that it required and the amount of energy it required. Um, I also think that it was really, really challenging to navigate while working
Mm.
and while life was lifing as well. So I had several things come up in life that were just like there were times where I was like, I think I may have to like stop. I think I need to stop or I may snap. But what I did learn throughout that process is if you have a program, and this is where I shout out Tulane's program and specifically Dr. Tanya Hansel, who was the director of the program at that time. You know, if you have people who are there who I feel are those true healers in social work, who hear you, who are willing to hear your experience and support you. It's not looking for any type of, excuse or handout or anything of that nature. It's being able to communicate like, hey, I'm navigating these things and this is what's coming up for me. And the stubborn part of me, that feet planted in the ground part of me, went through a lot of things and didn't share it because I didn't want it to be perceived as I'm trying to get a break with this. I'm trying to get. So I went through it, and so where I may have suffered grade wise in a couple of instances, like hey, I had to turn this in late because I actually was debilitatingly sick at one point. This is what I did because I didn't want it to. I didn't want, and this was a me thing. This wasn't a program thing. It was something I had to work through. But I didn't want to be perceived as being the person who made it because I was granted a pass to make it, if that makes sense. I'm here, I'm earning it, I'm gonna fight through it, was my mindset. And I think for me, when I finally realized that you're in that, you're not allowing yourself to be human, was when I stopped and said, Alea, you gotta slow down and ask for what you need, or you will burn out and you won't finish it anyway. So what is it gonna be, sis?
Apparently you finished it. Congratulations too, by the way. I wanna pause for a second because I was just so intrigued by your licensing journey. Congratulations on the DSW, but when you finished it, the first thought I was having was I bet your mama would have been so proud of you. and just condolences because that was not that long ago that you lost her.
No, it's been such a journey with that as well, and that's what I meant by life, just kind of lifing its way through. You know, that is a loss. I believe losing a parent, especially, I say, even if the relationship wasn't close, right? Because we see people in therapy all the time who
Mm-hmm.
sometimes grieve that potential of
Mm-hmm.
things healing because
Mm-hmm.
the parent or someone passed when things were not on the best of terms.
Right.
But to have been blessed to grow into such a close relationship with my mom,
Mm-hmm.
and lose her so early. I think I was 35 or 35 when she passed. Um, it took me back to just feeling like I was a child again, like,
Mm-hmm.
and I know she would have been proud. I know she was very proud of me. I know she
Mm-hmm.
recognized you know, the lioness in me, so to speak, because or the stinger that I have, because a
Mm-hmm.
lot of things when she left to me in terms of her matriarchal role, which was also a different type of nuance because here I am being a matriarch as a trans woman, and so there's different nuances that had come up with that. But I'm so grateful that she at least got to see me turn it around. She got to see me, grow into who I am. And I know that in spirit, if she were able to be here, she would be proud. And so usually, like during my graduation celebration, I had a poster board with her picture on it. Just there. I just try to keep her memory in my presence as much as I can, and just as I say, hope and pray that whatever I'm doing it to do my family and my ancestors proud. And for right now, which is also odd, at this tender age, I am like the elder of my immediate family. Like we don't have anybody else in line. Everybody else is gone. And so that puts a different level of expectation because I do feel like, and I often say this, and I work with people through this in therapy all the time, that mortality clock starts to tick when the person that's in line ahead of you goes ahead and takes that leap, right? So it's like, oh, I guess I'm up to bat. And so there's that mixed with also feeling responsible as the eldest and having like, your younger siblings and then generations of people behind you. You, for me, I want to make sure that I'm leaving a legacy just for them to be okay. And while I would love, all of these grand things that people, want, how do you just imagine all these things? I just want stability and generational wealth for them. That's what I want them to be able to have what we didn't have, and not have to worry about trying to scramble to make it or fight through so much to make it in the world. So,
Absolutely. Can we say your mama's name?
yes, her name is Elizabeth. Um, Many people call her Liz or Nisi was her nickname.
Mm. Honor to Elizabeth. She raised a beautiful, beautiful daughter. Beautiful. I have a question. I'm still on your social work journey, and I'm curious, as a Black trans woman, what has been your experience within the profession of social work?
Woo!
You didn't know I was going there.
Oh, I'm glad you went there.
Okay.
Let me tell you, that, and I'm still on this journey. And this is why I encourage so many people who are of diverse identities to step into this space. Um, at times it's felt very isolating. And I say that because, and it makes me think back to how many people may have felt coming into our field in earlier years, like let's say Black women walking into the field in the 60s and 70s, and walking into these predominantly white spaces. For me, walking into those spaces has been very isolating at times because I've been for many years the only one of me in that space. I have, been able to, sit through some spaces, just being able to use cis assumed privilege, so to speak, or benefiting from it and not even realizing it, like people not even realizing that I'm trans. But if I'm not able to speak that or navigate situations and being honest with that, then I'm not holding space for people who look like me. So I've always been very intentional not to hide that aspect of myself. As a matter of fact, and there's only so much I can say on this, but going into my first social work job license, that ended in litigation. Just because of the treatment that I endured there and some of the things that I was left, exposed to, and that really put my livelihood and my life in jeopardy in some instances. Um, I'm coming to terms with and accepting that sometimes some of the hurt that I was going to be experiencing I was going to experience that from people who look like me. It was so hurtful to me that stemmed from treatment that I experienced at the hands of two other Black women who weren't of trans experience, who spearheaded and set all of those things off, for nothing other than them just not having a hatefulness and just a lack of understanding around those things. Now, to follow that up, I was supported by a lot of beautiful Black and brown women and men, um, cis het people that supported me through that as well in that setting. So I do not want to diminish that, but I think it speaks to that nuance of having to find my professional voice, because it's not the same as being able to, go out and, quote unquote, read somebody or say this, and I'm in a professional setting. I'm a licensed professional. So how do I navigate this in a way that's going to sustain my licensure? How do I navigate this in a way that's going to maintain my professional integrity, right? But then how do I do that in a way that's authentic and going to be healthy for me? So there were times during that process that I was really mentally depleted because I had to navigate so much and I was so unprotected in that space. But at that time, it was a reminder for me that, okay, you've made it so far, but it doesn't mean that you're immune to the things that you'll have to experience because of how you show up in the world. And that stuck with me until now. Even at where I am now, it doesn't make me immune to experiencing the pitfalls that are set for me because of how I show up. And if I'm experiencing this, having gone through these things, and having had some experience or knowledge around navigating it, right? What does this say for the person who walks in who doesn't have that experience, who doesn't have the know-how, who feels powerless? And so I take that with me in my work, not only with trans individuals, but I've worked a lot with, our ancestors in the Black community when I did a lot of renal care work back where I'm from. And you see the disproportionate, number of us there and how many of them were treated, not necessarily on a direct level, but on a systemic level. Those type of things are what fueled me in saying, no, I'm here and I'm going to show up this way. And this is how I'm going to advocate and create space, hold space make pathways for people who look like me. My ultimate wish is that we can find more cohesion in recognizing that the things that we're divided on, especially within our community, are just a few of master's tools that were laid out to keep us divided, because we're stronger together.
We're preaching. You are preaching. You know what? Some of my supervisees have said, what? When we talk about people having negative experiences within the profession, they're like, oh my God, all the social workers I know are so nice. But to me, this profession is like, that's where the hurt people come, because they want to learn about themselves and they want to help others because either they saw others in their family hurt or they were hurt themselves. And so what we know to be true is hurt people hurt people. And so,
Yes,
we got to be mindful that as social workers, we got to still keep doing the work. We got to
yes,
still do the self-reflection work, do the professional learning work, but we still got to keep doing the work so that we're not bleeding on each other and hurting folks,
yes.
intentionally or unintentionally. Yeah. Yeah.
Amen. I received that.
Thank you so much for sharing your journey I loved it, Dr. Lay. I loved it, but I'm going to move on to our next question. And you probably have kind of answered some of this, but I want to get a little bit specific. As social workers, we usually have communities or populations that we are passionate about and perhaps work in, like DV, child advocacy, or even prison reform. What populations are you most passionate about and why?
I am definitely passionate about working with our queer community. I'm definitely, whenever I have the opportunity to, and I move with intention, to work and serve those individuals who are of queer communities, specifically BIPOC or Black, Indigenous people of color, um, specifically working with Black queer individuals, Black femme individuals who look like me. I intentionally seek out opportunities to support that sector of community. I also am very intentional about supporting our Black women, whether it be cis or trans. I'm very intentional about working with our aging populations. For me, older individuals, aging populations, our elders, they just hold a special place for me because sometimes we can, especially in society's time, we're being conditioned to feel like, oh, well, they're getting older anyway. So, but no, they still have experiences that they're navigating and adjusting to this ever-changing world. And sometimes just having somebody who is able to sit with them, because sometimes doing therapy with an older person, which I love, sometimes feels like having a conversation with your grandparents or your people from, back in the gap, where you're just sitting and allowing them to have the space to emote or express, which sometimes they don't have because they're holding space and being an anchor for generations of people, right? And so I love to be able to do that and have those down to earth, real world conversations with them while also helping them work toward whatever healing or journey toward peace that they need. It doesn't have to look black and white. It doesn't have to be, this structured thing that we have to follow these things to the T. As long as we're being ethical and knowing that those things are in play, we don't have to sit and preach at them or read to them. We have to meet them where they are. And I think that's the same of every population we work with, but especially that population. And so when I find myself doing, when I'm working with elderly people, case management, which I don't mind, being an anchor in the ear and also helping them to learn how to process and conceptualize some of the things that we work through in therapy, putting it in language that they understand. So, and in terms that they understand from the guise of their own upbringing, right? So I can't go in with them, speaking with them, saying, oh, well, this is neurodivergence and all these things. I need to be able to have conversations with them that they get. And so a lot of times when we have those conversations, it doesn't mean that I'm dumbing it down. It means that I'm understanding where they're coming from and we're putting it in terms that are relatable to them. That's important for those of us who are showing up in this space, for us to be able to recognize that we still got, our elders here that we need to support. And we still also, when we're doing that, we can apply that to other things. I might not be a cisgender woman, but the experiences that I have either gone through as a result of showing up aesthetically like that, or that I've lived through inadvertently or watched my mother or my grandmother go through, have poured into me to help me to be able to say, hold on, let's take another look at this. And also give an outside perspective. So we add value to people's lives every day when we're able to step into that realm of thinking that, I'm here to work as a healer and I'm here to understand the things that you've gone through. And I know I went on a tangent with it, but I just feel so passionate about it. And I feel like that is the piece that's missing when we see the divide that comes up around issues of gender, around gender identity. We miss that communal piece, especially in the Black community. We are a communal community. Like we come from a mentality of a village mentality. We help and lift up each other. We have to tie back into that. We have to realize that our strength comes from that.
Oh, that was beautiful. And you know what I was thinking about? Some of the younger social workers who may feel intimidated with working with older, because I remember, especially this is 25 years ago, getting my MSW and thinking that I didn't have kids their age, but what can I offer those folks who had lived life longer than I had. But I love, one of the things I've learned now over these 2 decades is just holding space. You just hold space. And like you said, make it relatable, and they enjoy you being there holding space with them.
Yes.
Absolutely. That was beautiful. I'm glad you went on a rant. That was good. Dr. Lay, what is one belief about social work that you started on this journey with that you feel has changed the most for you?
I think that what's changed the most for me is when I first got into social work, I went into grad school thinking that everybody had a mind like mine or a heart like mine. And that was that, oh, we're here to serve. We're here, we want to, we want social justice and we want all these things. And then you start realizing, oh, okay. So there's a divide around politics. And oh, okay. So you don't necessarily believe that people have, should have the same levels of access, or you do hold this level of belief. And, you know, um, I think that was the biggest like awakening for me, is realizing that not everybody is truly understanding of what equity looks like. And some people were fighting, who felt they were fighting for equity, were actually fighting for access. Um, they were fighting for, to be in a space to hold a position of privilege or hold a position of power. That's not what equity is. And so I think that was the biggest slap in the face for me. And that was when I was in my MSW program, when I started running into people who were like, just staunch Republicans and nothing against anybody who is, but if we're talking about being for the people and we really want to have a deep conversation, um, there's a lot that can be said around politics in general, around government in general. Which me as a Black trans person, I'm not very trustful of it because I've been harmed a lot by policies instituted by our government. So I encourage anybody who is a person who rests outside the realm of being a white cisgender man to always be willing to take a second look at these policies, because they are definitely not written in everybody's best interest. So,
Dr. Lay, I love that you figured that out in your MSW program. It took me 15 years. 15 years post-masters. And I started looking around. I was like, oh, not everybody thinks like I do. And not all social workers think like I do. And not all social workers have the same agenda. And so I love that you were
mhm.
able to get that early on in your career, because it took me a minute, but I got it now. I absolutely got it now. Oh, Darley, this has been such an amazing conversation. I have loved it. And thank you so much for coming on. But we are coming to our last question. And, you shared such a beautiful journey, both, your personal journey and your professional journey. And I'm thinking about, one of the reasons I wanted to do this podcast was to try to help diminish burnout rate, which is 5 years post-masters, right? Because social work can break your heart. It just can, right?
Yes,
It
it
just breaks
is.
your heart. So I'm curious about, is there any time social work has broken your heart, and what advice could you give others who may be feeling burnt out or heartbroken within this profession?
That is a beautiful question. And I think too that my response would be remembering that the role that you're in and our profession as a collective are two different things. Um, I've been in spaces where the environment has broken my heart. The treatment that I've endured in those spaces has broken my heart. But if I'm holding true to what I believe and what social work says that it purports itself to be, then social work itself hasn't broken my heart. All of those things haven't been in vain for me. And I've run into so many people who, and this is at various points in my journey, who have hit those walls and they are in spaces where they feel like, this is it. This is what I went to school for. I don't want to do this. I can't believe I did this. Why did I sign up for this? And I have to remind them, this isn't it. This means to me, when you run into that wall, and it's gonna take going into places that are not always comfortable, but it means it's time for you to explore your other options before you check out on it altogether. Because there's so many different aspects of social work that we can do, and so many different beautiful, fulfilling environments that we can step into that counter those type of environments. um, I can remember being in spaces where social work's role was diminished almost down to being a task worker or a clerical person. And for me, and again, it goes back to this stinger I got over here. No, I'm not no, I'm gonna fight for what it is I know. And I know that we come highly trained with a set of skills, really unlike many other professions. And more often than not, if you notice in many settings, we're pulled into leadership roles because we have the propensity and the humanistic aspect to be able to lead, and sift through certain situations. If there's conflict resolution in certain settings, they're calling in the social worker. Wait a minute, I'm a social worker for the patients, but I'll try to support how I can. We're being called into those things. But I say, if you find that an environment is too taxing for you, I can remember times in certain settings I would come home crying every day. And it was because of dealing with death and dying so directly. And I had to realize this isn't for me. I have to find another aspect of care because this is too heavy on me and where I am in life. And so if it's compromising me emotionally to that extent, that I'm not going to be able to show up to be the best version or that I can be, or to provide the services, the level of services that I know I can provide. So I would encourage them to take a step back, start doing some reconsideration about your environment or the role that you're in, look into other aspects of care, and work through that fear that can come up that can keep you beholden into that certain situation. Take them chains off in that situation. Be willing to go into something else. And sometimes that discomfort that you're feeling, it's just that barrier between you having a peace of mind in your next role. The other encouragement that I would give is, please give yourself grace and be kind to yourself. Take a break when you need to. I'm on a sabbatical right now. I'm taking this week, actually. I've not done any work. I said I scheduled off. I didn't schedule to go anywhere. I scheduled this time to be at home. And if I was going to be doing anything, it's going to be pouring into what's next. And even doing that in tandem, but give yourself the space to rest. We need that. We show up for people and we deal with people when they're in some of the most pivotal moments and most, critical moments of their lives. It stands to reason that some of that is going to weigh us down. So we have to be intentional about taking what we need and taking care of ourselves. And it doesn't always look like a day in the spa. It don't always look like going on an extravagant trip. Sometimes it looks like just being able to rest and be.
Absolutely. I love that Kismet kissed you with the air of social work. We are lucky to have you, Dr. Lay. We are absolutely lucky to have you within our profession. Thank you so much for coming on the Goddesses of Social Work podcast. This has been such an honor. I'm so glad you said yes.
I'm so happy that I was able to meet you, sis. I love what you're doing. I think this is so needed in our profession. So thank you for the hard work you're putting into this and all the work you put into the field as well. I appreciate what you do.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Goddesses of Social Work podcast. We are glad you were here. If you like this episode, please come back to hear more stories of the journeys through social work, and please leave us a review on Apple or Spotify. See you next time here on the Goddesses of Social Work podcast.